Thank you, Nate. Thanks for having me here. It's good to be here. The title of my talk is on preparation, so hopefully I came prepared. Those of you who will see the classroom later might see that there were some trade-offs that were made between preparing this talk and being ready for class today. I kid. But earlier this year, I had the opportunity to go to England with our students for a week. And it was really cool. In a lot of ways that I didn't expect, it was a full circle moment for me. Because while we were in the city of Dreaming Spires, we got to spend a day in Oxford, we were on a walking tour, and we walked past another beautiful Gothic building that's 400 or 500 or 600 years old. And our walking tour guide pointed out, this is the basement. The basement of this building is where Dwight Eisenhower spent 9 months preparing the D-Day invasion. And then she launched into a description of exactly how he did that. While surrounding himself with the maps and the latest maps and ordnance he could, he also had every British person who had ever vacationed in France since World War I mail their postcards into Oxford so that they could double and triple and quadruple check their maps with as much accuracy as possible. I thought that was cool. Because I had also, right after I graduated from college, gone to Normandy and seen the crosses row on row and all of the American, Canadian, and British men who died storming the beaches of Normandy. And it's Eisenhower who's famous for the quote, "The first casualty of battle is the plan." So he spent 9 months in Oxford preparing for this, and the goal was to hit the beaches and unite the Canadian, the British, and the American beaches the first day and reach the 7 miles to get to the city of Caen, C-A-E-N. Not sure I said that correctly. It took them 9 weeks to get those 7 miles. The plan was the first casualty, even of Dwight Eisenhower's D-Day invasion. But I love that story, and in a lot of ways, it was cool to be in both places, both where it was planned, one of the most peaceful, the oldest university in the English-speaking world, one of the most peaceful and intellectual places that English speakers could possibly go to find their home, and then the largest amphibious invasion that has ever happened in the history of the world, with the men buried right there who gave the last full measure of devotion, was really awesome. And it shows, truly awesome, right? And it showed the meticulous planning that can happen and why planning is important, but also the limits of what the plan can actually give us. And so that's kind of where I would like to frame today's talk. Planning is really, really important, but it's never everything. And we have to have the flexibility as teachers to work inside of the plan, or maybe set the plan as a rhythm to a beat, but we've got to be willing to improvise. So when I look at what it means to be a teacher, almost 15 years of classroom experience, I've found myself relying on the teachers who taught me well, but also on the teachers that I only have access to through books. And those are some of the greatest teachers that ever lived, right? It would have been worth it to know and be in their classrooms or be in their presence. But the next best thing, and the only thing that we have, living separated from them by centuries, is to access them through their books. So I'm going to rely primarily on 3 teachers whom I couldn't meet and couldn't dwell with, to give a few perspectives on what I've learned about planning and its limitations. But I start with Charlotte Mason, was a British educator who died 101 years ago. And she not only founded a bunch of schools when education was really universalizing in England, late 19th century, everyone was going to have at least an elementary education. So she founded a bunch of cottage schools in far-flung places where nobody wanted to teach anybody, like the Welsh. Ugh, who wants to teach the Welsh? Sorry. But that was the attitude at the time, and so she even wanted to teach the Welsh, which was great, and proved that they could be taught. But she also then opened a teacher's college and started training teachers for decades and decades until she died in 1923. And a quote of hers that stuck with me is that she defines a teacher as a guide, a philosopher, and a friend. And so I want to look at and unpack each of those with my own experience and the help of some other teachers to help you see, okay, whether you've been in the classroom already for a few years or you're really about to go with this and your first year will actually be September, I think there's something we can all learn from Miss Mason, as she was called. But a guide also connects us back to that Oxford walking tour guide, who honestly, other than that great anecdote, wasn't very good. We had asked for a guide who knew a lot about Tolkien and Lewis Carroll and John Henry Newman, and we got a guide who wanted to show us pictures of the Harry Potter scenes throughout Oxford. So it was off-putting at best. And that's the idea, is a guide ultimately needs to be somebody who's been there before. And our guide had lived in Oxford for 20 years and still had no knowledge, and I really pestered her with questions, of the Oxford that Newman had experienced, or the Oxford that Lewis knew, or the Oxford that Tolkien had experienced. And that was sad. Right? A good guide needs to bring his experience. So wherever you are coming from teaching, bring all of the experiences that you've had with you into the classroom. One of my favorite things to watch, in now going on my second decade at the Heights, is the number of teachers that have joined the faculty as second career faculty. They're awesome. They were really successful lawyers or engineers or doctors, and they bring all of that. And sometimes guys will pull them aside in the hallway and ask about this weird pain in their hand. But so, it's a benefit on a lot of levels, but the students absolutely benefit because they're unafraid to bring decades of their career experience into the classroom. And as a lifelong teacher, right, I started teaching straight out of college. I find that perspective is immensely helpful for our students, not to just have teachers who've taught since 22, while that can also be useful for how good we're able to get at teaching. But so the guide is someone who's been there before. The guide is prepared for contingencies. Right? When we lead these international trips, we often have to worry about things like, where's the embassy? What would we do if a 16-year-old lost his passport? What do we do if a 16-year-old has a medical emergency? Right? All of these things that, honestly, the high school boys we bring overseas don't think about for a second. But in order to be a good and competent guide, we better be thinking about that before it happens, instead of like, oh, he's bleeding. Now what do I do? That was awkward. That wasn't part of the plan. So you're prepared for the contingencies. Be aware of and try to get to know the age group that you're teaching, the community in which you'll be teaching. What are their expectations? What are their limitations, perhaps? What do you see before joining this community? And then what do you learn as being a part of it? And then I think a guide communicates clearly. So a guide has a plan, but doesn't just keep it to himself and say, follow the pink umbrella and just trust me. This museum's going to be awesome, right? A guide gives you an overview. Where are we going? Why are we here? Thanks for coming today. And that you really want to make sure is communicated to your students. I think the older your students are, the more necessary this is for buy-in. So a third grader can be told that we're just going to jump through flaming hoops today. It's going to be so awesome, and you're going to love it. And they're like, woo, flaming hoops. And they don't really need a big connection to the why, because they just love you, and you thought of something cool like flaming hoops for them to jump through. Awesome, right? But by the time you get to 9th grade, they're like, why are we doing this? This sounds stupid. Yeah, I don't see a point. Yeah, okay, I'm going to nap back here. So the idea is connecting them to their why and making sure that they know where you are going. Some of the best teachers that I've ever had, as I've reflected on it, were actually just competent. They knew where they were going, and they projected that confidence into the classroom, and so we all wanted to go with them, even if, it was first grade, and we didn't really know where anybody was going. But follow that, Pied Piper. So explain to them where you're going, and do it more often than just at the beginning of the year. Do it more often than just September. Maybe this week you want to explain. Here's what I want to accomplish this week. Let's get you on board with that plan. Even the day. Today, some teachers I had in college would bullet point the 2 or 3 things they wanted to get done that day and put it on the board, which then has publicly communicated it in a way that now we're all trying to move on. Sir, we didn't get to bullet point number 3 yet. Did you want to cover that in the last 2 minutes? So you want to communicate the plan by day, by week, by month, and by year. And it's actually going to be easier, you'll find, to plan in that way. You find the smallest unit you can plan instead of sitting down in June and thinking, I have to plan an entire school year, 180 days, right? It's too overwhelming. You can't bite that, so you take it like any elephant. How do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time, right? And reminding the students in front of you why you're there and what it is you're trying to accomplish can be really immensely helpful. So if a teacher is a guide, he's got experience, he's been further up the road, he knows how to deviate or can handle deviations and contingencies, and he communicates clearly his expectations and his plans to his students. But that's not all a teacher is, right? A guide was the beginning, but that makes it sound like you're just a logistics master and you need to know the what and the who and the where and the when and the why, right? And it is good to be on top of those things, and you'll find those things give you confidence and competence in the classroom, but it's a guide, a philosopher, and a friend. So let's move to that second one. Aristotle is often quoted as saying philosophy begins in wonder and ends in wisdom. And while I think that's a fair assessment or conclusion of what he actually says, what he actually says is a little wordier and a little more specific. So I wanted to dig into what he actually says, and this is in the metaphysics towards the beginning. He says philosophy begins now and first began amongst all men in wonder, wondering in the first place at obvious perplexities, and then gradually, by progression, raising questions about greater and greater matters, about the changes of the moon, of the sun, about the stars, about the origin of the universe. Now, he who wonders and is perplexed feels his ignorance. Thus, the myth lover is in a sense also the philosopher, since myths are composed of wonders. So that whole quote actually puts 2 words right next to each other in the Greek. Philomuthos. Philomuthos is a lover of learning. And so that was a Freudian slip. Philomuthos and philosophos, right? To be a lover of wisdom is first to be a lover of the myths, to be a lover of the wonderful stories, the stories that get to the roots of things, the stories that, like a good guide, tell us more about the why, tell us more about the how, and really answer those questions. And so we need to move wonder in our students first before we expect anything like wisdom from them or from ourselves. So the big thing here is to be a storyteller always on the lookout for 2 things. What seems wonderful to us, because those wonders are highly likely that the other humans in our room are going to wonder about them as well. And 2, what is wonderful to our students? So really meeting them where they are, getting to know them, and thinking, this student is really excited about chess. Why? How could I take that and move that, beyond just the simple realm of chess, since middle schoolers and early high schoolers are often laser focused on whatever their obsession is, right? And we're always often trying to broaden the horizon, broaden the perspective, pull off the blinders of the particular obsession that they have, for these past couple years, or the particular thing that's their thing. They define themselves a little bit by it in those early years of excitement. And it's also a great way to use the natural excitement and energy that are in this age group. So I'll joke that in the lower school, your job is to control the energy that's coming at you. You just here it comes, fire hose. You need to make sure you have a large enough receptacle to catch it and then siphon it into what we need to do today. Just the fiery hoops, right? But that energy transfer changes as they grow older, and you kind of have the crater of caring, which is about 8th or 9th grade, where they've just decided, in all of their 13 years of wisdom, half of which they barely remember, that they're just not good at this, Mr. So-and-so. They're not a math person. Never will be. Stop trying. And the idea is recapturing a kid like that, by getting him to care, is getting him to wonder, getting him to think, maybe I can do this. Okay, that was pretty interesting, what you said there, but I'm still not a math person. And it's going to take step by step, day by day, right? It's going to require a relationship, which we'll get to in a second. But what do our students wonder about? What do we wonder about? And then, again, touching back on the guide, a philosopher is wisdom. Aristotle defines wisdom as the knowledge of the causes of things. And so the greatest question you can get, and the way that you know you've hit it with a student and you've touched on that nerve of wonder, is when he asks you, okay, but why is it that way? Why did Alexander want to keep going and his men didn't? Right? And so that is where you get an opportunity, when you get a why question, to share what wisdom you have. And so bring your whole self into the classroom. Bring all of your experience. Even if you end up just saying something like, that's a great question, let's talk about that, right? We all need to share a perspective. That's a giant why, and we have a few minutes, so let's expand on it. I don't think we're going to solve it with finality here, but that why is going to be fuel for so much more learning for you, because the why has proven that you care. So concretely, the best way to be a philosopher in the classroom, I think, is to tell great stories. To tell stories with concrete details that make your students wonder about the dots that you've presented to them and how they connect, what they lead to, and why, ultimately, you told that story. And the last part of this definition is we move from philosopher to friend. There's kind of two aspects here of being a friend. C.S. Lewis, right, in The Four Loves, describes a friendship as beginning in that discovery that you both have something in common. Oh, you like stamp collecting too. Nice. We can be philatelists together. This shouldn't even be a word, but or you like golf too. Wonderful, right? We have something that we can do in common. And friendship is that gaze on a common object that you both love. So the love is not between each other. The love is of that third thing, is what makes a friendship a friendship. And in some ways, that's exactly what we're doing as a teacher. We don't want them, the students, we are not what they are learning more about. That will be an accident of them caring about us as a human being. But what we're there to do is have a common gaze. Hey, let's look at World War II. Let's look at the Scarlet Letter. Let's look at William Shakespeare together. And it's that common gaze that I think allows us to use the term friend analogously, because there's obviously a way in which we should not be the friend of our students any more than a parent should be a friend, right? And so when looking to some of the past reading, there is a famous work by Cicero called the De Amicitia on friendship that was taken by a 12th century abbot who kind of rewrote it in a Christian vein, or wrote to add some things to it. And what I like is that in this more scholastic Middle Ages treatise on friendship, he spends much more time talking about how to prepare to be a friend. What is it that sets the groundwork for friendship? And that's really helpful because that's ultimately what we're doing for our students. So I've taught long enough now that I've attended weddings and ordinations of students that I taught back in middle school. That's really powerful. It's really cool to be invited to someone's ordination or someone's wedding who, you knew before his voice changed. So how do we prepare our students in front of us for friendship? I think the first way is that we model friendships with our fellow faculty. So we look for things we have in common with our fellow faculty, because the most organic way that they're going to see that knowledge is unified is when a math teacher comes to read Virgil with a classics teacher, which we do sometimes here. Or when a reading group starts up on John Henry Newman and almost every type of teacher is represented: math, science, English, history. Right? It's those friendships that will really forge it. Another English professor here, or English teacher here, will pick a poem on a Friday afternoon, bring drinks and snacks, and invite whoever wants to come. And 20 or 30 of us will have a great conversation about 1, 2, or 3 poems, or sometimes a short story. And everybody's perspective is enriched, enlarged. We carry that wonder and that wisdom into the weekend and beyond, right back into the classroom. So that's the first way, is show them what friendship looks like. Our students will spend so many more hours with us that often they will not see their parents' friends as often as they will see us being friends with our fellow faculty. And so there will be friendships that will really stick with them, that they will remember. But back to this 12th century abbot, Aelred is his name, in northern Scotland, or in southern Scotland. He lists 4 things necessary for a friendship to start. And I think these are really helpful for us to bring into the classroom. Got to excuse the nerdery here with the Latin words, but I will give the Latin words and then unpack them. But he asks for dilectio and affectio. And he distinguishes those where dilectio is the outward benevolent acts that we do for our students. Opening the door for them, encouraging, inviting them in with a welcoming gesture, making it seem like we're glad to be around them, that we are happy to be in their presence, that we enjoy their company. We want them to come hang out in our classroom at lunch, or we want to stop in the hallway and ask how the game went yesterday, because we remembered. Right? That's dilectio. I said seem because sometimes it has to be faked. The inside action of that, right, is affectio. That's how you actually feel. And I'm not going to lie to you, sometimes you won't like your students, right? Or you will struggle to like a student. And this is where Aelred gives the best advice. He says it's an interior way to, it's essentially dilectio inside your heart. How do you actually feel about this student? Okay, so you can pretend to be kind in his presence. That's a good start. But the ultimate thing that's going to unite the two, affectio and dilectio, your internal attitude towards your student and your external actions, is prayer. You've got to take your students to prayer and then ask things very specifically like, Lord, help me love this student. He's so frustrating right now. And that is what is going to help you humanize your students and realize, okay, God loves this student. God made this student. He put him in my life. There's like a vocational aspect to all of those, providential aspect. How am I called to help this kid? How am I called to move? Well, how am I called to change? How am I going to learn to love this kid? And that's hard, but it's totally worth it. So that's dilectio and affectio. That's how we feel inside and how we feel outside. The other two are more the atmosphere as we create it. So the third thing necessary for friendship is securitas, which is pretty much what it sounds like, security, but it comes from a Latin root of being without care or anxiety. It's that same cura that Dido complains about right before she kills herself in the Aeneid. It's rough, right? Like that cura can be really, really heavy anxiety or or care about something. And so he continues that you should be without fear and without suspicion in all of your plans, so that what you say to your students know they can trust. Mr. So-and-so is being himself. He really means, come see me whenever you need help. He is not looking for a way to find me messing up, right? Is the timor, the fear of a normal student, I think. If we haven't cultivated an atmosphere that lacks that fear and suspicion, right? And I think I shouldn't want my classroom to feel like they're surrounded by Gestapo, okay? It's a good start anyway. And the other aspect of security, which is what is the groundwork before you can even be a friend, I need to be able to approach you without fear and suspicion, is eukunditas, which I'm going to translate roughly as fun. But it's enjoyment, it's pleasure. It can be defined a lot of ways. And it's about all things which happen to you, all things which you are thinking about, and all things which are learned or taught. So he really wants and encourages, put eukunditas into everything you do with someone that you think might be a friend. And that really, I think, is a combination of the other three. If you're afraid but I'm not a fun personality, I'm kind of boring, right? It isn't that you need to have party poppers and always come out with sort of this stereotype that we have of someone who's high energy and always smiling and so ready to have fun, because that's a little scary. You do want to be yourself, and I think the other three will naturally create an atmosphere of eukunditas. The students will be attracted to look at what it is that you love looking at. That's partly why you teach history or math or whatever it is. You love that subject. So I wouldn't stress about the eukunditas, but the idea is you want to bring it in to as many interactions as you can. So one thing concretely that I would do when I taught English is when I graded an essay, I would always look for, and I would put on the last section of the paper, a plus and a delta. And the pluses allowed me to list the things that I really liked about that student's writing, the things he was doing well. Because it's easy with a red pen to just point out the mistakes. And then the delta framed the mistakes not as you did this, and this wrong, but next time you write, try this with your sentences. Next time you write, do this differently. Delta is the standard symbol in physics for change. So change. Here's how you can change going forward, rather than just, man, you stink at periods. Really bad. So the framework allows us to, and I've used this framework to repeat each year and recognize that there's no mountaintop of perfect teaching, right? We're always on the way, both in this life and in our teaching careers. And that the virtue of being on the way, as Joseph Pieper defines it, is the virtue of hope, knowing confidently where we're headed. Heaven, the end of the school year, what have you, right? Whether that's short-term or long-term. Not really knowing what that looks like, right? We've been to the ends of other school years, but not this one. And whoa, COVID, right? So there are crazy things that happen. And not knowing the adventures that you'll have along the way, but realizing with Chesterton, right, that an adventure is just an inconvenience rightly considered. So, and that's where I think St. Josemaría's advice is the best for teachers especially. And I love that I work at a school where he's helping us out, is just begin and begin again. And so you'll always have the opportunity to restart. And a framework can be useful for helping you improve, not just in your first year, but in your fifth and in your 15th. So thank you.